The gentle hum of the dishwasher filled our kitchen, a stark contrast to the thunderous silence between my husband Dominic and me. I stood at the sink, mechanically rinsing dishes, my mind racing with thoughts of how we'd arrived at this point. The worn, soapy water slipped through my fingers, much like our once perfect marriage. It had all started on a balmy summer evening, the kind where the air hangs heavy with the scent of blooming jasmine and the promise of adventure. Dominic and I had just celebrated our 5th wedding anniversary and life seemed perfect. We lived in a charming 2-story house in the suburbs of Maplewood, a picturesque town where everyone knew their neighbors and summer block parties were a time-honored tradition. I remember the day everything changed as clearly as if it were yesterday. Dominic had come home early from his job at a local university, where he taught literature. He was in the kitchen, his lean frame bent over the stove as he stirred a pot of his famous homemade marinara sauce. The rich aroma of garlic and basil filled the air, making my mouth water. I leaned against the doorframe, watching him with a mixture of affection and something else, a restlessness I couldn't quite name. "Well, well," I said, my voice lilting with playful sarcasm. "Aren't you the perfect little housewife?" Dominic turned, a wooden spoon in hand, his warm brown eyes crinkling at the corners as he smiled. "Someone's got to feed us, Dorothy. We both know your culinary skills are limited to burning toast." I laughed, but something inside me bristled at his gentle teasing. Maybe it was the stress from my job at the local art gallery, or perhaps it was the nagging insecurity I'd been battling lately. Whatever the reason, I felt the sudden urge to push back, to assert myself. "Oh, come on," I said, my turn sharper than I intended. "You're such a softie sometimes, you know that. Always so careful, so domesticated." Dominic's smile faltered, confusion flickering in his eyes. "What do you mean?" I should have stopped there. I should have seen the hurt beginning to form in his expression. But I didn't. Instead, I doubled down, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "I mean, look at you," I gestured vaguely at his apron platform. "You're hardly the picture of masculine strength, are you? Sometimes I wonder if I should be worried about some gorgeous woman sweeping you off your feet, or if I should be more concerned about her stealing me away instead." The moment the words left my mouth, I knew I'd gone too far. Dominic's face fell, his eyes clouding with a mix of confusion and pain. He set down the wooden spoon, wiping his hands on his apron with deliberate slowness. "Is that really how you see me?" he asked, his voice quiet and strained. I felt a pang of regret, but my pride wouldn't let me back down. "Oh, come on, I'm just teasing. Don't be such a wimp about it." Dominic didn't respond. He simply untied his apron, frapping it over a kitchen chair. "I'm not feeling very hungry anymore," he said, his voice flat. "I think I'm going to go for a walk." As he brushed past me, I felt a chill settle over the room. I wanted to reach out, to apologize, to take back every thoughtless word. But I didn't. I watched him go, telling myself he was overreacting, that he'd get over it. I had no idea that this moment, this seemingly insignificant exchange, would be the first domino to fall in a cascade that would ultimately destroy everything we had built together. Over the next few weeks, I noticed a change in Dominic. He was quieter, more withdrawn. The easy banter we used to share over breakfast was replaced by tense silences. When I asked him what was wrong, he'd shrug and mutter, nothing, before burying himself in work or finding an excuse to leave the room. One evening, as I watched him mechanically grade papers at the dining room table, I couldn't take the silence anymore. "Dom, talk to me," I pleaded, sliding into the chair across from him. "What's going on with you?" He paused, his pen hovering over a student's essay. "Nothing's going on. I'm just busy." "Bullshit," I snapped, frustration bubbling up inside me. "You've been acting weird for weeks. Is this still about what I said? I told you I was just joking around." Dominic looked up, his eyes uncharacteristically cold. "Maybe I'm just embracing my role as the wimp in this relationship. Isn't that what you want?" His words stung, but I refused to back down. Don't be ridiculous. I never said that's what I wanted. I just think you could stand to toughen up a bit. Right, he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Because God forbid I show any emotion or vulnerability. That wouldn't be manly enough for you, would it? With that, he gathered his papers and stormed out of the room, leaving me alone with the ticking of the clock and a growing sense of unease. As the days turned into weeks, the distance between us grew. Dominic stopped doing the things he used to do. A surprise bouquets of wildflowers on the kitchen table, the silly text messages during the day, the impromptu slow dances in our living room. Our home, once filled with laughter and warmth, began to feel cold and empty. I tried to bridge the gap, but my efforts felt clumsy and forced. One evening, I suggested we go out for dinner at our favorite Italian restaurant. A cozy little place called Bella Nata where we'd had our first date. Dominic agreed, but the meal was a stilted affair. Our conversation was limited to surface level, small talk about work and the weather. As we drove home, the silence in the car was deafening. I stared out the window, watching the familiar streets of Maplewood blur past, and felt a lump forming in my throat. What had happened to us? How had we gone from being best friends and lovers to these strangers sitting side by side? When we got home, Dominic headed straight for his study, muttering something about needing to finish grading papers. I stood in the hallway, watching his retreating back, and felt a surge of frustration and loneliness. Is this how it's going to be now? I called after him, my voice trembling slightly. Are we just going to live like roommates? Dominic paused at the door to his study, his hand on the doorknob. He turned to look at me, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of the man I fell in love with. Vulnerable, open, hurting. But then his expression hardened, and he shrugged. I didn't know Dorothy, he said, his voice tired. Maybe this is just who I am. Wouldn't want to be too clingy or sensitive, right? Before I could respond, he disappeared into his study, the soft click of the door closing echoing in the empty hallway. I stood there for a long moment, feeling lost and alone in my own home. Part of me wanted to follow him, to force a conversation, to fix whatever had broken between us. But another part, a part I'm not proud of, felt a twisted sense of freedom. If Dominic wanted to be distant, fine. I didn't need him hovering over me, I didn't need his constant attention. I was my own person, after all. I could enjoy my independence, focus on my career, and spend more time with my friends. But as I crawled into our cold, empty bed that night, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that I was making a terrible mistake. That I was letting something precious slip through my fingers, all because of my own foolish pride. In the weeks that followed, I found myself craving the attention and affection that was now missing from my marriage. I started spending more time out with friends, staying late at work, anything to avoid the cold silence of our home. It was during one of these late nights of the gallery that I met Xavier. He was a visiting artist from New York, preparing for his upcoming exhibition. Tall, with piercing blue eyes and rubbish smile, he was charming and attentive in all the ways Dominic used to be. At first, our interactions were purely professional, but as time went on, I found myself looking forward to our conversations, craving his company. One night, after a particularly difficult day at home, Xavier and I were the last two left in the gallery. He noticed my distracted mood and asked if everything was okay. It's nothing, I said, forcing a smile as I mindlessly rearranged some brochures on the front desk. Just some stuff at home. Xavier leaned against the desk, his eyes full of concern. Want to talk about it? I'm a pretty good listener. And so, for the first time in months, I opened up. I told him about the growing distance between Dominic and me, about the loneliness and frustration I felt. Xavier listened attentively, offering words of comfort and understanding. As I finished speaking, I realized how close we were standing. I could smell his cologne, a heady mix of sandalwood and citrus, and feel a warmth radiating from his body. Before I could think better of it, I leaned in and kissed him. For a moment it was like the world disappeared. All the pain and loneliness of the past few months melted away in the heat of that kiss. But as quickly as it began, reality came crashing back. I pulled away, my heart pounding. I am sorry. I shouldn't have done that. Xavier looked as shocked as I felt. Dorothy, Please, I cut him off, grabbing my purse and keys. Just forget this ever happened. I fled the gallery, my mind reeling. What had I done? How could I have let things go this far? As I drove home, I tried to convince myself that it was just a momentary lapse in judgment, that it didn't mean anything. But deep down, I knew I had crossed a line, and there was no going back. When I got home, Dominic was already in bed. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom, watching the rise and fall of his chest as he slept, and felt a wave of guilt wash over me. Despite everything, I still loved him. How could I have betrayed him like this? I crawled into bed, careful not to wake him, and stared at the ceiling. I knew I should tell him what happened, that I owed him the truth. The thought of causing him more pain, of potentially destroying what was left of our marriage, was too much to bear. So I kept quiet, telling myself it was a one-time mistake that would never happen again. But as the days went by, I found myself thinking about Xavier more and more. The guilt ate away at me, but so did the longing for the connection and affection I was missing at home. What started as an innocent flirtation evolved into stolen moments of the gallery, secret text messages, and eventually clandestine meetings outside of work. I told myself it wasn't really cheating. We hadn't slept together after all, but deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. One evening, after a particularly intense make-out session in Xavier's car, I returned home to find Dominic waiting for me in the living room. The moment I saw his face, illuminated by the soft glow of a single lamp, I knew something was wrong. "Where have you been?" he asked, his voice unnaturally calm. I felt my heart rate spike. "I told you, I had to work late. We're preparing for Xavier's exhibition." Dominic's eyes narrowed. "Funny, because I called the gallery an hour ago and they said you'd left already." Panic rose in my throat. "I went for a walk. I needed to clear my head." "Stop lying to me, Dorothy," Dominic said, his voice rising as he stood up. "I know about Xavier." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "What? Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" Dominic's fists were clenched at his sides, his knuckles white. "Did you think you could just sneak around behind my back and I'd be too stupid to notice?" "Dominic, I can explain." "Explain what?" he shouted, making me flinch. "Explain how you've been cheating on me. How you've been lying to my face for weeks." Tears streamed down my face. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. It didn't mean anything, I swear." Dominic laughed bitterly. "It didn't mean anything. Is that supposed to make me feel better?" "Please, Dominic," I begged, reaching out to him. "Let's talk about this. We can work it out." He recoiled as if my touch burned him. "Work it out," he repeated incredulously. "You destroyed everything we had, and you think we can just work it out?" "Don't," he said, his voice breaking. "Just don't." For hours we argued. I pleaded. I cried. I tried to explain how lonely and disconnected I'd felt. But with every word, I could see Dominic pulling further away from me. "You called me a wimp," he said, his voice raw with emotion. "You said I wasn't man enough for you, and then you go and do this? Do you have any idea how that makes me feel?" "I didn't mean it," I sobbed. "I was just lashing out. I love you, Dominic. Please, we can fix this." But I could see in his eyes that something had broken, perhaps irreparably. The trust, the love, the connection we'd shared for so many years. It had all crumbled under the weight of my betrayal. Finally, as the first light of dawn began to creep through the windows, casting long shadows across our living room, Dominic looked at me with eyes full of pain and betrayal. "I want a divorce," he said quietly. Those 4 words hit me like a physical blow. "No," I whispered, sinking to my knees. "Please, Dominic, we can fix this. I'll do anything." But Dominic shook his head, tears glistening in his eyes. "There's nothing left to fix, Dorothy. You broke us beyond repair." In the days that followed, I was in a daze. Dominic moved out, staying with a friend while he looked for his own place. I've alternated between desperate attempts to change his mind and bouts of anger where I blamed him for pushing me away in the first place. I reached out to our friends, hoping they could talk some sense into Dominic. But as news of my infidelity spread through our tight-knit community, I found myself increasingly isolated. People who I thought were my friends now looked at me with judgment in their eyes. The whispers followed me everywhere, at the grocery store, at the local coffee shop, even at work. Even my parents, when I finally worked up the courage to tell them what had happened, were disappointed in me. "How could you do this, Dorothy?" My mother asked, her voice heavy with disapproval, as we sat in a sunlit kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd spent countless hours as a child. "Dominic is such a good man. How could you throw away your marriage like this? I didn't mean for it to happen." I tried to explain, my hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had long since gone cold. "Things between us were so bad, and I just—" "You just what?" My father cut in, his usual jovial demeanor replaced by stern disappointment. "Decided to cheat instead of working on your marriage? I thought we raised you better than that." Their words stung, but I couldn't argue. They were right. I had made a terrible mistake, and now I was facing the consequences. As the reality of my situation set in, I found myself spiraling. I lost my job at the gallery. Apparently, office romances were frowned upon, especially when they led to public scenes in the parking lot. With no income and Dominic no longer supporting me, I couldn't afford to keep our house. I ended up in a tiny, run-down apartment on the outskirts of town. The walls were thin, the plumbing unreliable, and the neighbors noisy. It was a far cry from the comfortable life I'd grown accustomed to with Dominic. One night, as I sat on the lumpy second-hand couch in my shabby new living room, surrounded by unpacked boxes and faded dreams, the full weight of what I'd done came crashing down on me. I'd lost everything, my husband, my home, my job, my friends, all because of my own selfish actions. I broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. For hours, I cried until I had no tears left. When I finally calmed down, I picked up my phone and, against my judgment, called Dominic. To my surprise, he answered, "Dorothy, what do you want?" His voice, once so full of love and warmth, now sounded tired and weary. It broke my heart all over again. "Dominic," I choked out. "I'm so sorry, for everything. I know I messed up, I know I hurt you, but please, can we just talk? I miss you so much." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. For a moment, I dared to hope that maybe, just maybe, he'd give me another chance. But when he spoke again, his voice was firm and final. "I'm sorry, Dorothy, but it's too late. The divorce papers are being filed tomorrow. Please, don't call me again." The line went dead, and with it, the last shred of hope I'd been clinging to. I curled up on the couch, feeling more alone than I'd ever had in my life. As I lay there, replaying every mistake I'd made, every cruel word I'd spoken, every opportunity I'd squandered to save my marriage, I was hit with a crushing realization. I had done this to myself. My thoughtless teasing, my emotional affair, my lies, they had all led me to this moment. I thought about the day I'd called Dominic a wimp, the day I'd implied he wasn't man enough for me, how wrong I'd been. Dominic had been strong in all the ways that truly mattered. Kind, supportive, loving. And I had thrown it all away. The next few weeks were a blur of legal meetings, paperwork, and gut-wrenching decisions about how to divide the life we'd built together. Each time I saw Dominic across the conference table, looking composed and distant, it felt like a knife twisting in my heart. Our friends, once so central to our lives, had mostly taken Dominic's side. I couldn't blame them. I was the one who had betrayed not just my husband, but the values our entire social circle held dear. One afternoon, I ran into Sarah, my former best friend, at the local supermarket. The awkwardness was palpable as we stood among the produce, both pretending to be deeply interested in selecting the perfect avocado. "How are you holding up?" Sarah finally asked, her voice a mixture of concern and reproach. I tried to smile, but it felt more like a grimace. "I'm surviving. How's Dominic?" Sarah's expression softened slightly. "He's hurting, Dorothy. But he's strong. He'll be okay." I nodded, fighting back tears. "I never meant for any of this to happen, you know." I know, Sarah sighed. "But it did happen. And now you both have to live with the consequences." As she walked away, I was left with a bitter taste of regret and the realization that I had not only lost my husband, but also the entire support system I had once taken for granted. The financial reality of my situation soon became impossible to ignore. With no job and mounting legal fees, I was quickly burning through what little savings I had left. The threat of eviction loomed large, a constant source of anxiety that kept me up at night. In desperation, I swallowed my pride and called my parents. The conversation was stilted, filled with long, uncomfortable pauses. "Mom, Dad," I said, my voice small and defeated. "I need help. I can't make rent this month. I don't know what to do." There was a heavy silence on the other end of the line. Finally, my father spoke, his voice weary. "Dorothy, we love you. You're our daughter, but we can't keep bailing you out of situations you've created for yourself. It's time you faced the consequences of your actions." His words, though not unexpected, felt like a physical blow. "I understand." I whispered, fighting back tears. "I'm sorry for disappointing you both." As I hung up the phone, the full weight of my isolation crashed down upon me. I had no one left to turn to, no safety net to catch me as I fell. That night, as I sat on the floor of my nearly empty apartment, surrounded by past due bills and final notices, I cried harder than I ever had before. The tears weren't just for my current situation, but for everything I had lost: my marriage, my friends, my family's trust, my sense of self-worth. I thought back to that fateful summer evening, when I had carelessly tossed out those hurtful words to Dornick. How different would things be now if I had just kept my mouth shut? If I had appreciated the wonderful man I had instead of seeking validation elsewhere? As the first light of dawn crept through my grimy windows, I made a silent vow to myself. I couldn't change the past, but I could learn from it. I would become a better person, someone worthy of the love and trust one had so carelessly discarded. It would be a long, difficult journey, but it was one I had to make. The next day, I started by applying for any job I could find. I ended up as a waitress at a small diner on the outskirts of town. A far cry from my previous career in the art world, but it was a start. The work was hard, the hours long, and the pay meager, but it was honest work. Each time I tied on my apron, I reminded myself that this was part of my penance, part of rebuilding myself from the ground up. Slowly, painfully, I began to piece my life back together. I found a support group for divorced women, where I could share my story without judgment and learn from others who had been through similar experiences. It was there that I finally began to confront the deep-seated insecurities and fears that had led me to sabotage my marriage in the first place. Months passed, and while the pain didn't disappear, it became more manageable. I learned to live with the consequences of my actions, to find small joys in my new, humble life. I volunteered at a local animal shelter, finding solace in the unconditional love of the abandoned pets. I took up running, using physical exertion as a way to clear my mind and process my emotions. 1 year to the day after Dominic had told me he wanted a divorce, I found myself walking through the park where we used to spend lazy Sunday afternoons. The trees were in full bloom, their sweet scent filling the air, a poignant reminder of happier times. As I rounded a bend in the path, I saw him. Dominic was sitting on our old favorite bench, feeding the ducks. For a moment, I froze, unsure whether to approach or turn and run. But before I could decide, he looked up and our eyes met. Time seemed to stand still as we gazed at each other across the sun-dappled path. Then slowly, Dominic raised his hand in a small wave. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't reconciliation, but it was something. Acknowledgement, perhaps, that we had both survived the storm of the past year. I waved back, a lump forming in my throat. As I continued on my way, leaving Dominic to his quiet moment by the pond, I felt something shift inside me. The crushing weight of guilt and regret that I had carried for so long seemed to lighten, just a little. I realized then that while I couldn't undo the past, I could shape my future. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but for the first time in a year, I felt a glimmer of hope. I had lost everything, but in that loss, I had found the strength to become someone new. Someone who would never again take love for granted or let petty insecurities destroy what was truly valuable. As I walked home to my small apartment, I made a promise to myself. I would continue to work on becoming the best version of myself, not for Dominic or for anyone else but for me. And maybe, just maybe, one day I would be worthy of the kind of love I had so carelessly thrown away. The sun was setting as I reached my building, painting the sky in brilliant shades of pink and gold. I paused for a moment, taking in the beauty of the moment. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The future was uncertain, but I was finally ready to face it. Older, wiser, and infinitely more grateful for the lessons life had taught me.
Now start second story.
Reading the notice from work stirred up old memories I had hoped to forget. My unfaithful ex-wife, Kim, was now my boss. I should have seen it coming, but I was just relieved to be out of the marriage. Now it was all coming back to haunt me. Kim used to say I had a heart attack waiting to happen, and she was right. My doctor warned me, but I ignored it, thinking I was just working hard to provide for my family. Kim always wanted more. The mansion, the pool, the country club membership. I thought it was my duty to provide all that. Now, the woman I once loved had the power to control my life again. I realized I couldn't work under her, not after knowing about her infidelity. I packed my things, picked up my resignation letter, and walked out of my office for the last time. I left the letter, my company phone, car keys, and credit card on Hazel's desk. I told her it had been great working with her and wished her the best. I advised her not to let Kim push her around and to use my departure as leverage if needed. Hazel was surprised, asking if I was really leaving. I confirmed that I couldn't work for someone I didn't respect. She admitted that Kim had been inquiring about my workload, making her feel uneasy. I reassured her that she had done nothing wrong and that my decision was inevitable after the merger memo. As I left, I told Hazel to be honest with Kim about my departure and to prioritize her own principles. We shook hands, and I promised to stay in touch. As I got into my car, a black limo pulled up in front of the office. Kim stepped out with two well-dressed men, looking every bit the high-status businesswoman she portrayed. Despite her sharp appearance, I knew her true nature. She didn't spot me, which was fine by me. I waited for her to go inside before driving out of the parking lot for the last time. I had settled my affairs, sold what I needed, and put the rest in storage. Taking my doctor's advice, I decided to travel and unwind from work stress. After 3 months of sightseeing, I ended up in a small, almost forgotten town with friendly locals, great weather, and excellent fishing. I rented a cozy 3-bedroom cottage by a lake, with the option to buy, and started fresh. Sitting on the deck, enjoying a cold drink, I wondered how Kim was handling my departure. The next day, I called Hazel to check in. She told me how chaotic things had become after I left. Kim was making changes all over the company. There have been layoffs everywhere. Kevin Paxton left last week after a fight with her. I'm not sure what happened, but she moved him from logistics to the basement archives. Hazel also shared how Kim tried to fire her for not stopping me from leaving, but Hazel stood her ground and even secured a promotion. While I was pleased my departure had impacted Kim's plans, I also felt some concern for how it might affect others in the company. The next morning, I ran out of sugar and went to the nearby convenience store. I almost bumped into a young couple leaving and saw a stressed woman in her early 20s behind the counter. "Can I help you?" she asked, as a baby fussed in the background and cars pulled up at the gas pumps outside. The woman sighed, "Where is Jillian when I need her?" I smiled and said, "Can I help instead? I'm Sam, and I live up the road. I see your baby needs feeding and I just need some sugar. I don't have anything pressing to do, so if Jillian arrives or until you're done, I'd be happy to help. How about I take care of the customers outside while you look after your baby?" The woman introduced herself as Monica and asked for my help. I went outside, assisted customers with their fuel, cleaned windshields, and then returned inside to handle the payments. When another customer came in to browse, I approached him, noticing he was interested in the fishing rods. He mentioned he was just passing through and had some time to kill while his car was being repaired. Recognizing a fellow former businessman, I persuaded him to invest in a better rod for a more enjoyable fishing experience. After helping several more customers, Monica finally had a moment to put her baby down after feeding. She expressed her gratitude for my help and wondered why things always seemed to get busy at the worst times. She explained that her usual help, Jillian, hadn't arrived yet, and her baby, Bessie, was typically not fussy at this hour. I made a light-hearted comment about hiring more reliable help, but Monica's expression fell. She revealed that she was a widow. Her husband Greg, who was in the Army Reserves, had died in a training accident. The truck he was in overturned, and tragically, Greg never knew he was going to be a father. Bessie was likely conceived the night before he left. Monica wiped away her tears and shared that Greg had many plans for the store and the land they owned. In the weeks that followed, I made it a point to visit the store and help out whenever I could. I know what you're thinking, and you're probably right. Monica was attractive, and it had been a while since I'd been with anyone, but beyond that, helping her restored my sense of purpose. What hurt the most was knowing that Kim's cheating meant she didn't need me or believe I could support my family. It felt like the ultimate insult. Monica seemed to recognize my need to give, and although she never directly asked for help, she always accepted it and appreciated my support. I began to feel good about our time together. She was funny, caring, and grateful, which made me feel good too. I was heading home when my phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Hazel, who warned me that my ex-boss had hired a private investigator to follow me. Hazel had been forced to arrange it to keep her job, but wanted to give me a heads up so I could stay out of sight and avoid detection. She explained that my ex-boss was at her breaking point, working long hours and visibly stressed, even gaining weight. Desperate to find me, she blamed Hazel for not getting to talk to me before I left. I realized that ignoring this situation wouldn't work, so I told Hazel to wait a week and then give my ex-boss a fake report, saying they couldn't find me but that my phone was active and she had convinced me to talk to her. Hazel was concerned about putting me in this position, but I assured her that she should prioritize her own safety and that I appreciated her help. A week later, Hazel sent me a text before she started work. PH02BB2D. Be ready for a call today sometime. Seeing the text message, I laughed at the abbreviations. BB? Which boss? No, it must mean a number. Man, these young people and their tech jargon. Then I tried to think of what to say to her but drew a blank. I decided to deal with it when the time came. True to her word, the call came through. Recognizing Kim's number, I answered with, "Yes, Kim, what do you want?" Kim seemed surprised by my slurred speech and abrupt greeting. What's that witch of a secretary been? I hung up. The phone rang again. Holy cow, Sam. Once more, I hung up. When it rang a third time, Hazel cut in quickly. Are you going to talk to her or not? I laughed. Tell her to keep her tone civil next time she calls if she wants to have a real conversation. I'm done with her trying to boss me around. Hazel chuckled. I'll be happy to pass that message along. Talk to you later. After a 5-minute pause, the phone rang again. Sam. Yes, Kim, what do you want? There was another pause before Kim said, Can I speak with you for a moment? I'm listening. Another pause followed. Has Hazel been crying to you? What has she said? Hazel is quite capable, and it doesn't matter what she told me. That so-called witch of a secretary is the only reason you're speaking to me now. You should be thanking her for helping you out, so I'll ask you again, what do you want? I thought I heard Kim sigh. I'm sorry, Sam. I've been a bit on edge lately. I know Hazel has done her job well and I really do appreciate it. I sensed Kim was trying to calm me down and wondered why she was giving in so easily. Get to the point, Kim. You still haven't told me what you want. Kim's voice wavered as she choked back a small sob. I need to talk to you, Sam. I need your advice. I had hoped we would be working together, you know, as a team, but you left and disappeared before I could discuss it with you. I grunted in frustration. I saw the signs, Kim. The moment I got that memo about your company buying mine, I knew there was no point in sticking around to face more humiliation. So now that we've cleared that up, have a nice life. I doubt I'll cross paths with you again since I don't move in your circles anymore. Goodbye. Kim's voice grew desperate. No, please, Sam. I really need to talk to you, but it has to be in person, not over the phone. I know I might not deserve it, but I'm begging you. Just give me 30 minutes to explain my idea and then I'll leave you alone. By the end of her plea, she was almost in tears. Please, Sam, I don't know who else to turn to. Grinding my teeth, I fought the urge to hang up and forget this woman ever existed. A long moment passed as I struggled with myself. All right, Kim, but I'm not chasing you around. If you want to talk, you'll have to come to me. I'll arrange it with Hazel and she'll let you know the details. I ended the call before Kim could respond, expecting her to call back, but the phone stayed silent all night. Kim was frustrated. Why do I have to go through all this, Hazel? Why can't you just give me Sam's address and let me go on my own? Hazel, gripping the steering wheel tightly, replied, I've told you before, Kim, Sam wants it this way. You need to meet him on his terms. He doesn't want to see you otherwise. To quote him directly, it's my way or the highway, her choice. I don't enjoy this any more than you do, but if he wants me to bring you, that's what I'll do. I won't stick around while you two talk. I'll make myself scarce. Don't worry. I started chopping vegetables and herbs for the Italian sauce I was preparing for dinner. Hazel had called 30 minutes earlier to let me know they were less than an hour away, so they'd probably arrive in 20 to 30 minutes. I wanted to make sure Kim didn't feel at ease while she was here, so I kept myself busy to stay focused and keep her on edge. 15 minutes later, a knock echoed through the house. Come in, the door's open. Hazel walked in with a genuine smile, teasing. Look at you, all settled in like a pro. I laughed at her comment. Hey, Hazel, it's great to see you. You're looking good. My gaze shifted to Kim, who followed Hazel in, looking nervous. Kim, I greeted her briefly, noting Hazel's quick assessment of Kim's appearance. In that fleeting glance, I noticed the dark circles under her eyes and the extra weight she'd put on. Hazel's estimate of 10 kilos, though a bit harsh, wasn't far off. Hazel declared, I could really use a drink, as she gave me a warm hug and a kiss on the cheek. You're looking pretty good yourself. Country life seems to be agreeing with you. If you're thirsty, there's wine, beer, or cola in the fridge, I said, showing my dirty hands. Kim, do you want something to drink? Kim noticed the chilly tone in my voice and lowered her head, realizing this meeting would be tougher than she expected. Hi, Sam. Thank you. A glass of wine would be nice. Hazel's right, you do look well. Hazel uncorked a bottle of white wine and poured 2 glasses, handing one to Kim. Which way to the edge of the world? I want to check out the view, she said, gesturing towards the back with the wine bottle. I'll leave you two to talk things out, but remember, she said, pointing the bottle at me, I'm not here to deal with any messes, so play nice. I chuckled at Hazel's joke about me being off the grid and directed her to the back door. No worries here, there's a fishing rod out on the deck if you want to give it a go. Hazel rolled her eyes, I wouldn't even know what to do with it if I caught something. She then wandered outside, leaving Kim and me alone for our conversation. Sit down and tell me why you're here, I said, gesturing to a chair as I returned to chopping herbs. Kim hesitated before sitting down and glanced around, trying to break the tension. You have a nice place here, it's small but charming. I tensed up, feeling my frustration with her presence starting to show. This isn't a social visit, Kim, I continued chopping basil vigorously. Just say what you need to say so we can both move on with our lives. Kim took a deep breath, sipped her wine for courage, and asked, Can I ask you one question? I exhaled heavily. You can ask as many questions as you like, Kim, that doesn't mean I'll answer them, but go ahead and try. Why did you leave? Kim looked at me, clearly trying to gauge my reaction and bracing herself for any signs of anger. From our years together she probably knew I was working hard to keep my temper in check. I slammed the knife down and faced Kim. You don't need a PhD to understand why I left, Kim. You're a big shot vice president now, you must have some smarts to get there, surely you can figure it out. Kim flinched at my jab about her career progression, and I could see her frustration building. That was a cheap shot, even for you, Sam. I'm perfectly capable of doing my job. What I can't do is read minds. With my arms crossed, I stared at her for a long moment. Kim seemed to shrink under my gaze. You're right, Kim. Mind reading isn't a common skill, but in a role like yours, you need to be able to understand people and anticipate their motives. A good executive identifies their team's strengths and uses them effectively. It's not about being cruel, it's about creating a win-win situation. Do you really want to hear what I think of you and your skills, Kim? A shiver ran down her spine when I asked my question. It was clear she had a good idea of what I might say, and I could tell it wasn't boosting her confidence. Still, she probably thought keeping the conversation going was her best shot at getting what she wanted. She squared her shoulders and said, All right, Sam, I'll bite. What do you think of my corporate skills? Her attempt to provoke me almost made me laugh, but I just went back to cooking. You're a bulldozer, Kim. You charge through like a bull in a china shop with no regard for finesse or subtlety. I could tell this caught her off guard. Her open-mouthed reaction was clear evidence. A bulldozer? She finally managed to stammer, then asked, Could you explain that further? As I continued chopping, I smiled inwardly. Certainly, Kim. A bulldozer? You take the most straightforward path to your goal, even if it's not the easiest one. You don't consider the situation or think about who you might help or who might help you. You only focus on yourself. You don't strategize or plan your approach. You just plow through, ignoring anyone who gets in your way. That's why you're in the difficult spot you're in now. You've burned your bridges and destroyed everything in your path. Watching her, I noticed a tear forming in the corner of her eye as she listened to my critique. For the first time since I'd known her, she seemed at a loss for words. Her response was weak. No. I don't. Her feeble defense spoke volumes. Everything I did was for us, Sam. But your ego has made you blind to that. I know I hurt you and I've apologized countless times. If you had stayed, I could have shared my plan with you. You still haven't explained why you left. I tasted the sauce and decided to add more salt. I'm not oblivious, Kim. When I saw the writing on the wall, it was clear you were coming in to clean house. You're the one sent to get rid of people so the company could move forward, and I agreed that it was necessary. All I did was make it easier for you to make those tough choices. Her expression showed she was eager to steer the conversation this way. Sam Beckman, for someone who's supposed to be smart, you sure do some foolish things. I never planned to fire you. If you had any sense, you would have realized that. Like I said, everything I did was for us. I wanted you to see all your dreams come true. She was clearly trying to tug at my heartstrings and flatter me, but I wasn't buying it. My frustration stemmed from her trying to manipulate me. I remember countless times we sat in the kitchen, with you complaining about how the higher-ups were ruining the company with their poor management. I believed in you, Sam. You promised you could turn things around. Now, I'm in a position to help you make those ideas happen. I believed you could do it, and I worked hard to give you that chance. I went to bat with my bosses, saying I could bring in big profits for your company. And what did I get in return? Oh, great. Now she's playing the blame game. You left me high and dry without even letting me share my plans with you. I've been working tirelessly trying to prove that what you said was possible. All I need is a bit of help from the one man I've ever loved. That's you, Sam. We could enjoy the rewards of what we've achieved together if you'd just join me. Ah, the classic, I love you and let's plan our future line. I'm not foolish enough to think we'll rekindle our relationship, even though I often wish we could. What I see now is that we might build a successful business partnership and find happiness. So what do you think? How about we call a truce, get to work and show everyone that we're a powerful team? Kim took another sip of her wine and leaned back, looking pleased that I had listened without interrupting. Now that she had made her pitch, it was up to me to decide what to do next. As I finished making the sauce and started boiling water for the spaghetti, I couldn't help but recall Caesar's last words, "Et tu, Brutus." Betrayal was the first thing that came to mind when I learned about her scheming for her company and the excuses she gave. Despite Kim's heartfelt plea, a nagging thought kept hitting me. Her past and present actions could be summed up in those 3 words. All right, Kim, a good executive evaluates all options before making a decision. Let's say I actually buy into your so-called brilliant plan. Why do you think I'd be any help to you? Annoyance flashed in Kim's eyes at my question. To her, it seemed obvious. I've told you before that I believe you have the skills to make this work and that you have enough standing in the company to get the support you need. People respect your opinions and trust you. The obstacles you faced before were all due to upper management, which I've cleared up by taking over as VP. What are you trying to say? With a sad smile, I replied, you can't see that your taking over has actually undermined my ability to gather support. But I'm not surprised. You refuse to acknowledge that you've done anything wrong. Others, however, see it differently, Kim. The shock was clear on Kim's face as I continued. Ever wonder why you're struggling to get support for your ideas? The gossip around the office has already spread the word about your business practices and ethics, and I didn't even have to say a thing. Kim's expression went blank. I was touching on a topic she preferred to avoid. What people see is someone who climbed to the top by using her body to get ahead, leaving others who deserved it behind to struggle. Kim winced noticeably. They know you were unfaithful during our marriage, and that made working there tough until I realized I still had my dignity and their respect after our divorce. Accepting your offer would mean I'd be endorsing everything you did, and instead of being a betrayed spouse, I'd just be a betrayed employee. I'd lose their respect and my ability to work would go down the drain. Tears began forming in Kim's eyes again as my negative feedback took its toll. Her confidence in her position seemed to falter. I don't believe you, Sam. I've proven I'm willing to work hard and that I reached this position to get things done. If I weren't capable, Jason wouldn't have given me the role. Shaking my head, I felt my anger and frustration turning into sadness. It became clear that Kim truly believed her own narrative, possibly out of self-preservation, and was avoiding the truth about her situation. Did Jason approach you about the takeover or did you push for it yourself? Kim dabbed her eyes with a tissue from her purse and stood up with a bit of optimism. It doesn't matter what you or anyone else thinks. I'm not just a puppet for Jason. I went to him and he made it difficult for me before finally letting me present my proposal to the board of directors. I acknowledged what Kim said, realizing it matched my suspicions about the merger's origins. Just as I suspected. Can I ask you something? Was Jason deeply involved with you when he agreed to let you address the board, or were you providing him with other kinds of favors? Kim's shocked expression made her guilt obvious. Her gasp confirmed it. Struggling to maintain her composure, she asked, "Why would you think that?" I laughed at her reaction. "Do you know why I was good at my job, Kim?" I went on after the rhetorical question. "I've always made profiles of everyone I meet, and yes, that includes you. The issue with your profile was that I didn't factor in my feelings for you. I mistakenly trusted you completely, thinking that if you loved me, you'd be trustworthy. That was a costly mistake, and I adjusted your profile accordingly. As my grandfather used to say, there's no point in getting older if you don't get smarter. My approach is to assess people by their actions, not just their words. If their actions match their profile, I can work with them or find a way around them. I usually make the best of any situation. Knowing Jason, I don't think he cares whether you succeed or fail. If you fail, he'll just distance himself and blame the board for approving your proposal." The realization seemed to dawn on Kim as I continued. "If you succeed, Jason will take credit for promoting a rising executive who boosted profits. He benefits no matter the outcome. So much for thinking you have support from above. Jason doesn't care if you're clever enough to handle this job or naive enough to believe in this plan. As long as you keep him satisfied, he's content. You're on your own, Kim. A small fish in a big pond and the predators are circling." Kim fiddled with her tissue. Everything I said seemed to hit home, and it probably scared her to realize that her situation was worse than she first thought. But true to her usual approach, she refused to accept that she might not secure her future. "So you believe I can't pull this off?" My response was clear. "No, Kim. I don't just think about it. I know you can't do this." I saw Kim's anger start to rise, but continued. "It won't be minor issues you're dealing with. It'll be a massive failure that could kick you out of your VP role and into obscurity. What will happen to your precious security then?" To calm myself, I turned away from her. "From what I hear, all you've done is create a lot of noise without making any real progress. You've been so busy spinning your wheels that others are struggling to get their work done." Looking back at Kim, I said, "I'd be shocked if there isn't a significant drop in quarterly profits at the next shareholders meeting, but that's just speculation. You can dress this up however you want, but it all boils down to why you did it in the first place. Here's what I know and think. You said you loved me and that you did this for us." Kim trembled under my harsh words, but nodded in agreement. "However, according to you, it's really all about your own security and nothing to do with mine or our future. If you truly loved me as you claim, you would have moved mountains to make sure I didn't work myself to death. Remember what you said? I had a heart attack just waiting to happen." I paused, letting her reflect, then continued. "You didn't make much of an effort, or if you did, it wasn't convincing. Instead, you went ahead and secured your position while waiting for me to drop dead. You could have threatened to divorce me if I didn't take it easy and think about us. I'm sure that would have made me rethink things, and your betrayal certainly did. It's why I'm here now, feeling better for it. I love you, Sam. I didn't want to divorce you. You didn't want to divorce me, but you were okay with watching me work myself to death. That's a real sign of love, isn't it? I said with sarcasm. Inside, I felt a small satisfaction. Kim couldn't counter my points and avoided my gaze. I didn't mean what I said back then, and I still love you. I regret a lot of what I said to you back then. My serious expression probably showed that I had doubts. I also believed that Kim was convinced of her own words. I don't doubt that you love me in your own way, Kim, but that doesn't help our situation. Can't you see? I can't trust you now, either personally or in business. It was time to wrap up this conversation. Here's how I see it now. You've reached as high as you can go. There's no one left to advance you further. You'll need to wait for Jason to retire or pass away before you can become CEO, and you thought this would be a good chance to secure your place and claim the top spot. Kim tried to argue, but I stopped her. That's why you took over my old company. You hoped to manipulate me into working hard again just to benefit yourself. I'm amazed you thought I'd just go along with it. I assumed it was clear I wasn't going to be a pushover after I kicked you out the first time. Then I realized it might have been my fault for setting you up to fail. Seeing Kim struggle, I noticed that one moment I was blaming her, and the next I was taking responsibility. You're not making sense, Sam. It seems like you've got everything mixed up. I lowered my head and sighed deeply. All right, Kim. You've heard the saying, being cruel to be kind. Well, I wasn't kind. I should have been harsh with you, but instead, I led you on and should have really just cut you off and walked away. Even though you deserve to be left high and dry, I went to Jason and made him keep his word to promote you to VP. I cared about you enough not to leave you hanging, even if that was a mistake. Your constant love notes on my birthday, Christmas, and every other occasion only made me think you believed there was a chance I'd come back. I stood up to check the sauce and added more water to the nearly empty pot. Had I done what I should have, you'd have vanished to a place where no one knew you, healed your wounds, and started over, hopefully wiser. That's what I suggest now. Walk away and start fresh. Tears were welling up in her eyes again. You'll probably end up back in a secretarial job, but that's still better than staying and dealing with what's coming. You'd be lucky if your job only involved licking stamps while dealing with some unpleasant mailroom clerk. Watching Kim, I saw how my words hit her. I tried to be harsh, but it was disappointing to see defiance rather than acceptance on her face. I know I hurt you and I regret it every day, but what you just heard was cruel. You don't believe in me at all, despite everything I've believed in you. If that's how you feel, then watch closely and see how it's done. At that moment, there was a knock on the door. Come in, I snapped, annoyed. Monica entered, concerned. Is everything okay, Sam? I'm sorry if I'm interrupting. Realizing how much time had passed and feeling regret for losing my temper, I apologized. I'm sorry, Monica. Please come in. Kim was just about to leave. I glanced at Kim, waiting for her to get up. Kim glanced at Monica standing in the doorway. Monica looked about 5 to 10 years younger, with striking features, slim build, and long, flowing, dark, auburn hair. The realization of why Monica was there hit Kim hard, and her face showed it. She then looked back at me, who was simply staring at her, before her gaze shifted to the food simmering on the stove and back to me. As the truth dawned on her, Kim's tears began to fall. I noticed her reaction and understood what she was thinking. What? Did you think this dinner was for you? I made it clear from the start that this wasn't a social visit. Don't get upset because I'm having a friend over. We're done, and have been for years. I only let you come here to try and get some sense into you. Kim jumped up, headed down, and hurried past Monica, mumbling, telling Hazel I'll be waiting in the car for her. Monica looked at Kim leaving, and asked, I hope I haven't made things worse. Should I tell Jillian I don't need her to babysit after all? This has nothing to do with you, I reassured Monica. I'm glad you arrived when you did. I gave Monica a hug and a kiss on the cheek. Could you put the pasta in and keep an eye on it for a moment? I need to let Hazel know our meeting is over and that she can take Kim home. Walking out onto the back deck, I saw Hazel relaxing as the last rays of the afternoon sun disappeared behind the hills. It struck me that one thing Kim had said was true. With Kim now VP, she had removed all the obstacles to my ideas. I asked Hazel, how's the view? It's just as you described, Sam. Refreshing, Hazel said, smiling with her eyes closed. How did it go in there? I didn't hear any arguments. Not well, I'm afraid. She's not backing down and is waiting for you in the car right now. Can I ask you something? Of course, Sam, you can ask me anything. I smiled faintly. What do you see in your future at work? How ambitious are you, Hazel? Hazel's eyes widened at my unexpected question. I'm not sure what you're getting at, Sam. But if you're suggesting what I think, then I definitely want a chance at Kim's position. I'm confident I can do the job well, but I won't compromise my principles to get it. Why do you ask? I lowered my head, thinking. I believe it's time to put an end to this chaotic situation. With a firm tone, I added, can you get Kevin Paxton on board and meet me in town in 3 weeks? I might have an offer for both of you. Hazel nodded in agreement. I guided Hazel back into the cottage where she saw Monica at the stove. Giving me a nudge with her elbow, she whispered, I see why Kim left so quickly. You old dog. Her expression made me smile. Monica's stunning, and I bet she was the final straw for Kim. Honestly, Kim's nowhere near Monica's league. Not even I am. That poor girl must be nursing her wounded pride. I agreed with Hazel about Monica's beauty. And she's just as wonderful on the inside. Monica looked up as I introduced Hazel. Nice to meet you. Sam seems to have so many women around, I'm not sure there's enough space for me, she said cautiously. Hazel laughed. Don't worry about any other woman you see Sam with. He's a one-woman man, that's for sure. And from what I can see, he's definitely interested in you. Better keep an eye out. Sam can be quite the romantic when he's interested. I wasn't sure where Hazel was coming from. I hadn't been in any social situations with her for her to make such a comment. Feeling my face redden, I said, I think you've said enough for tonight, Hazel. It's time for you to go. As I escorted her to the front door, she glanced back and gave her final advice. If you're smart, Monica, don't let this guy slip away. She gave me one last kiss on the cheek and said goodbye. Behave yourself, and I'll see you in 3 weeks. Monica and I were finishing our dinner and drinking Merlot on the back deck while we watched the ducks and swans float by. We talked about the events from earlier that day, and I filled Monica in on the messy details of my marriage to Kim and the chaos it caused. Sam, you really don't want to go through with this, do you? I flinched at the thought of what lay ahead. No, Monica, you're right. I don't want to do it, but it's necessary. I can't just sit back and let everyone lose their jobs because I took the easy way out. Even though it's tough, I have no other option.
Now start second story.
I had a good life and I was happy with everything, but at one time I wanted more freedom and pleasure. That desire drove me into a stinking swamp. Looking back now, I can see how naive and foolish I was. My name is Sharon and this is the story of how I destroyed my life and the lives of those I loved most. It was a balmy evening in late August when I made the decision that would change everything. I remember standing in our kitchen, washing dishes and staring out the window at the setting sun painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. Henry, my husband of 15 years, was in the living room helping our kids with their homework. The sound of their laughter drifted through the house, a familiar and comforting soundtrack to our family life. But beneath that comforting facade, a restlessness had been growing inside me for months. Maybe it was a midlife crisis or maybe it was just plain selfishness. Whatever it was, it had led me into the arms of Arnold, a colleague from work who had been pursuing me for months. Arnold was everything Henry wasn't: spontaneous, passionate, exciting. Where Henry was steady and reliable, Arnold was unpredictable and thrilling. I told myself it was just a harmless flirtation at first, but it quickly spiraled into a full-blown affair. For 3 months, I lived a double life. Devoted wife and mother by day, Arnold's secret lover by night. The guilt was consuming, but the excitement of our clandestine meetings was intoxicating. I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. But secrets have a way of demanding to be told, and I was tired of living a lie. That's when I had what I thought was a double life. I broached the subject with Arnold first. We were lying in his bed, the sheets tumbled around us, when I suggested bringing our relationship out into the open. What if, I said, tracing patterns on his chest, we didn't have to hide anymore? What if we could be together, openly, without hurting Henry? Arnold propped himself up on one elbow, his brow furrowed. What are you talking about, Sharon? Are you saying you want to leave Henry for me? I shook my head. No, not exactly. I'm talking about polyamory. Where we could all be together. You, me, and Henry. Arnold's eyebrows shot up. You can't be serious. Sharon, your husband, is the most straight-laced conventional guy I've ever met. There's no way he'd agree to that. But I was convinced I could make it work. Henry loved me, after all. He'd do anything to make me happy, wouldn't he? Just trust me, I told Arnold. I know Henry. I can make him understand. Looking back, I can see how delusional I was. But at the time, high on the thrill of new love and the idea of having it all, I truly believed I could make this work. The next day, I asked Arnold to come home with me after work. My heart was pounding as we pulled into the driveway of the house Henry and I'd shared for over a decade. The house where we'd raise our children, celebrated holidays, weathered storms both literal and metaphorical. And now, I was about to drop a bomb that would shake its very foundations. Henry was in the kitchen when we walked in, stirring a pot of what smelled like his famous spaghetti sauce. He turned when he heard us, a welcoming smile on his face that faltered when he saw Arnold. Hey, honey, I said, my voice unnaturally high. This is Arnold. From work. We need to talk to you about something. Henry's eyes darted between Arnold and me, confusion clear on his face. Okay, he said slowly. Why don't we sit down in the living room? We settled into the living room, Henry in his favorite armchair, Arnold and I on the couch. The tension in the air was palpable. I could see Henry's eyes lingering on how close Arnold and I were sitting, the way our shoulders almost touched. So Henry said, his voice carefully neutral. What did you want to talk about? I took a deep breath, steeling myself. Henry, I know this is going to come as a shock, but Arnold and I are in love. The words hung in the air like a noxious gas. Henry's face went blank, then pale, then flushed with anger. What? He said, his voice dangerously low. We've been seeing each other for a few months now. I continued, the words tumbling out in a rush. And we've realized that we want to be together. But I love you too, Henry. I don't want to lose you. That's why. That's why I think we should try polyamory. Henry stared at me as if I'd grown a second head. Polyamory, he repeated flatly. You want us to what? Share you? Arnold chose that moment to speak up. What Sharon's trying to say, Henry, is that she believes she can love both of us. We're not asking you to step aside just to expand your idea of what a relationship can be. I watched as Henry's face transformed, confusion giving way to disbelief, then to a fury I'd never seen before. He stood up abruptly, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Are you out of your fucking minds? He growled, his voice low and dangerous. Sharon, what the hell are you thinking? We have a family, for God's sake. I flinched at his turn, not used to seeing Henry so angry. Henry, please, I pleaded. Just listen. I love you. I really do. But I love Arnold too. I thought we could make this work. Be a modern family, you know. Henry laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that made me shrink back into the couch. A modern family. Is that what you call this? Betrayal and lies packaged up in new age bullshit. He started pacing the room, running his hands through his hair in agitation. How long? He demanded. How long have you been lying to me, Sharon? I swallowed hard. 3 months ago, I admitted in a small voice. Henry stopped pacing, turning to look at me with such hurt and betrayal in his eyes that I felt physically ill. 3 months, he repeated, 3 months of lies, of sneaking around behind my back. And now you have the audacity to bring him into our home and ask me to accept it. Henry, I understand this is a lot to take in. Arnold started, but Henry cut him off with a glare that could have melted steel. You, Henry snarled, pointing at Arnold. You don't get to speak. You don't get to have any say in this. You're nothing but a homewrecker, and I want you out of my house. Henry, please, I begged, tears starting to roll down my cheeks. Can't we just talk about this? I know it's a shock, but, a shock. Henry interrupted, his voice rising. A shock is finding out we're having surprise twins. This is a fucking nightmare. I need some air. With that, he stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him. I sat there on the couch, stunned as the sound of his car engine roared to life and then faded into the distance. Arnold put his arm around me, trying to comfort me, but I shrugged him off. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Henry was supposed to be upset at first, sure, but then he was supposed to listen to understand. He wasn't supposed to just walk out. Maybe this wasn't such a good idea, Arnold said softly. Sharon, I think I should go. I nodded numbly, not even looking at him as he let himself out. I sat there in the silent house, the home that had once been full of love and laughter and now feeling cold and empty. Hours passed. The sky outside darkened from twilight to true night. I sat on the couch, alternating between crying and staring blankly at the wall, replaying the disastrous conversation over and over in my head. It was well past midnight when I heard Henry's car pull back into the driveway. I sat up straighter, wiping at my tear-stained face, trying to compose myself. Maybe now, after he'd had time to cool down, we could talk rationally about this. The front door opened and Henry walked in. His face was set in hard lines, his eyes cold as he looked at me. Without a word, he went upstairs. I heard his footsteps moving around upstairs, then the sound of drawers opening and closing. When he came back downstairs, he was holding a small velvet box, the box that held my engagement and wedding rings. I'd stopped wearing them a few months ago, claiming they irritated my skin. The truth was, I couldn't bear to wear them while I was with Arnold. The sight of that box now made my stomach lurch. Henry, I said hesitantly, what are you doing? He didn't answer, just jerked his head towards the stairs. Bathroom, he said curtly. Now, confused and more than a little scared, I followed him up to our master bathroom. He flicked on the harsh fluorescent light, illuminating the space where we'd shared so many mundane, intimate moments over the years, brushing our teeth side by side, Henry trimming his beard while I applied my makeup and stolen kisses as we rushed to get ready for work. Henry went straight to the toilet and lifted the lid. My confusion deepened. What was he doing? You want to know what I'm doing, Sharon? Henry's voice was cold, detached. I'm flushing 15 years of marriage down the toilet, just like you did when you decided to bring your affair partner into our home and ask me to share you. With that, he opened the ring box and dumped its contents into the toilet bowl. I gasped, reaching out instinctively to stop him, but it was too late. The rings, symbols of our love, our commitment, our life together, glinted in the water for a moment before Henry's hand came down on the flush lever. I watched, horrified, as the rings disappeared in a whirlpool of water. The finality of it, the symbolism, hit me like a physical blow. I sank to my knees on the cold tile floor, sobs racking my body. "Henry," I choked out between gasps. "Please, we can fix this. We can go to counseling, work things out. Please don't throw everything away." Henry looked down at me, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of the man I loved. Compassionate, kind-hearted Henry. Then his face hardened again. "I'm not the one who threw everything away, Sharon," he said, his voice flat. "You did that the moment you decided to cheat on me. And now you have the audacity to ask me to accept it. To live in some arrangement. No, just no." I reached for him, but he stepped back, out of my reach. "Henry, please," I begged. "I love you. We can work through this. I'll do anything." But Henry was shaking his head. "It's too late for that, Sharon. You made your choice. Now you have to live with the consequences." "What are you saying?" I whispered, fear creeping into my voice. "I'm saying get out," Henry replied, his voice steady despite the pain I could see in his eyes. "Pack your things and leave. I want you out of this house and out of this town. Our marriage is over, Sharon. There's no coming back from this." His words hit me like a physical blow. "But the kids," I protested weakly. "The kids will stay with me," Henry said firmly. "You can talk to my lawyer about visitation." "Henry, come on," I pleaded, grabbing his arm. "This is extreme. We can work this out. For the kids, if nothing else." He shook off my grip, his face set in lines of determination. "No, Sharon, we can't. You destroyed everything we had. Everything we built. I can't even look at you without feeling sick. How am I supposed to trust you ever again?" With that, he walked out of the bathroom, leaving me crumpled on the floor. My world shattered into a million pieces. The next few days passed in a blur of tears and frantic packing. Henry was like a stone cold and immovable. He barely looked at me as I moved around the house, gathering my belongings. The children were confused and upset, especially when Henry told them I would be moving out. Emma, our 12-year-old, refused to speak to me. Jake, at 8, just cried and asked why I was leaving. I moved in with Arnold temporarily, not knowing where else to go. But things between us were strained from the start. The excitement of our affair had faded, replaced by the harsh reality of what we'd done. "It'll be okay," Arnold would say, trying to comfort me as I cried myself to sleep night after night. "Henry will cool down eventually. We'll figure this out." But deep down, I knew it wouldn't be okay. I crossed a line, destroyed something precious, and there was no going back. Meanwhile, Henry wasted no time in setting the divorce proceedings in motion. He hired Janet Becker, a lawyer known for her ruthless efficiency in divorce cases. I received the divorce papers less than a week after I'd moved out. I tried calling Henry countless times, leaving voicemails that ranged from tearful apologies to angry accusations. He never responded, letting all communication go through his lawyer. The divorce proceedings were brutal. My lawyer tried to paint me as a victim of a loveless marriage, seeking fulfillment I couldn't find at home. But Janet was relentless, using my affair and my suggestion of polyamory to portray me as an unfit mother more concerned with my own desires than the well-being of my children. I sat in the courtroom, watching as my life was dissected and judged. Friends I'd known for years testified about how they'd seen changes in my behavior, how I'd become secretive and distant. My own parents, their faces etched with disappointment, spoke about how they'd raised me with better values than this. Henry sat across the aisle, his face impassive as he listened to the proceedings. He looked older, lines of stress etched around his eyes and mouth, but he held himself for the quiet dignity that made my heart ache. When it came time for the judge to make his ruling, I held my breath, hoping against hope for some miracle. But as I listened to him speak, my heart sank lower and lower. In light of the evidence presented, the judge said, his voice echoing in the quiet courtroom, I find that it is in the best interest of the children to remain in the primary custody of their father, Henry Thompson. Mrs. Thompson will be granted supervised visitation rights to be arranged through the court. The words hit me like a physical blow. I gasped, unable to believe what I was hearing. Supervised visitation, I was their mother. How could they do this to me? I turned to my lawyer, hoping he'd jump up, object, do something. But he just shook his head slightly, a look of resignation on his face. It was over. I'd lost everything. As the courtroom began to clear, I sat there, stunned. Henry walked past me without a glance, his lawyer at his side. I watched him go, feeling as if I was watching my entire life walk away with him. The months that followed were the darkest of my life. I spiraled into a deep depression, barely able to get out of bed most days. Arnold tried to be supportive at first, but our relationship quickly deteriorated. Without the excitement of secrecy, we found we had little in common. We fought constantly, over big things and small things. Your mother, the woman I fell in love with. Arnold shouted during one particularly bad fight. Where's the fun, exciting Sharon? All you do is mope around and cry about your ex-husband. What did you expect? I screamed back. That I'd just forget about my entire life? My children? You have no idea what I've lost. It wasn't long before Arnold and I broke up. I found myself alone in a small dingy apartment on the outskirts of town. Surrounded by boxes, I couldn't bring myself to unpack. My life had become a shadow of what it once was. My friends, the ones who'd known Henry and me as a couple, gradually distanced themselves. I'd hear about dinner parties I wasn't invited to, playdates arranged for kids that didn't include Jake and Emma. My phone, once constantly buzzing with texts and calls, fell silent. Even my family pulled away. My parents, deeply religious and traditional, were horrified by what I'd done. My sister, once my closest confidant, now treated me like a stranger. I just don't understand how you could do this, she said during one of our increasingly rare phone calls. How could you throw away everything you had for? For what? Some fling. I lost my job too. The scandal of my divorce had spread through the office grapevine, and my boss called me in for a chat about company image and values. I walked out of that building for the last time with a cardboard box of personal items and a severance package that wouldn't last long. Supervised visits with my children were both the highlight and the lowlight of my weeks. Seeing Jake and Emma, watching them grow and change, hearing about their lives, it was precious time. But it was also a constant reminder of what I'd lost, of the life I was no longer part of. Emma, in particular, was struggling with the situation. At 13 now, she was old enough to understand what had happened, and her anger towards me was palpable. Why did you have to ruin everything? She spat at me during one visit, her eyes brimming with tears. We were happy. Why wasn't that enough for you? I reached for her, desperate to comfort her, to explain, but she jerked away from my touch. Don't, she cried. Just don't. Jake, at 9, was more confused than angry. When are you coming home, Mommy? He'd ask, his big brown eyes full of innocence. I miss you. Each time, I'd have to swallow the lump in my throat and explain again that I wouldn't be coming home, that this was our new normal now. The social worker who supervised our visits, a kind-faced woman named Marta, often tried to comfort me after these difficult interactions. Even times, she'd say, patting my arm. Children are resilient, they'll come around. But as the months passed, I began to wonder if that was true. The distance between me and my children seemed to grow with each visit, no matter how hard I tried to bridge it. One day, about a year after the divorce, I ran into Henry at the grocery store. It was the first time I'd seen him outside of our supervised visits in months. He looked good, he'd lost weight, and there was a comment about him that I invited. "Henry," I said, my voice catching in my throat. "Ha, how are you?" He looked at me, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of the warmth that used to be there, but it quickly faded, replaced by a cool politeness. "I'm fine, Sharon," he replied. "The kids are doing well." I nodded, fighting back tears. "That's good, I'm glad." We stood there awkwardly for a moment, the distance between us feeling like a chasm. I wanted to say so much, to apologize again, to beg for another chance, to ask if he ever thought about me, but the words wouldn't come. "Well," Henry said finally, "I should get going. Take care, Sharon." As I watched him walk away, I was struck by the finality of it all. This man, who had once been my everything, was now a stranger, and it was all my fault. That night, lying alone in my small apartment, I finally allowed myself to fully face the consequences of my actions. I'd had it all, a loving husband, beautiful children, a comfortable life, and I'd thrown it all away for a fleeting moment of excitement, for the illusion of freedom. The realization hit me like a physical blow, leaving me gasping for air. I curled up on my bed, sobs racking my body as I mourned for everything I'd lost, everything I'd destroyed. As the weeks turned into months, I slowly began to rebuild my life. I found a new job, not as good as my old one, but it paid the bills. I started seeing a therapist, working through my guilt and regret, trying to understand why I'd made the choices I had. My relationship with my children remained strained, but there were small improvements. Emma's anger gradually softened into a wary acceptance. Jake, while still confused, seemed to adjust to our new reality. They were growing up, becoming their own people, and I was grateful for any part of their lives they were willing to share with me. Henry too was moving on with his life. I heard through the grapevine that he'd started dating again. The news felt like a knife to my heart, but I knew I had no right to feel that way. I'd given up any claim to his heart the moment I betrayed him. 5 years after that fateful night when I'd brought Arnold home, I found myself sitting on a park bench, watching families play and picnic on a sunny Saturday afternoon. A familiar laugh caught my attention, and I turned to see Henry, Emma, and Jake setting up a picnic blanket not far from where I sat. They looked happy, relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in years. Emma, now a beautiful young woman of 17, was admittedly telling a story, her hands gesturing wildly. Jake, 14, and lanky were tossing a frisbee with a golden retriever I didn't recognize. And Henry? Henry was smiling, his arm around a woman I didn't know. The sight of them, my family, but not my family anymore, brought tears to my eyes. But for the first time, the tears weren't just of sadness and regret. There was a bittersweet acceptance there too. They were happy, they had moved on. And maybe, just maybe, it was time for me to do the same. As I sat there, watching the family I'd lost, I thought about the long, difficult journey I'd been on. The pain I'd caused, the lessons I'd learned, the person I'd become through it all. I thought about the young, foolish Sharon who had thought she could have it all, who had been willing to risk everything for a fleeting thrill. If I could go back and talk to Sharon, what would I say? Would I warn her about the pain and loneliness that lay ahead? Would I beg her to appreciate what she had before it was too late? Or would I tell her that sometimes we have to lose everything to truly understand its value? In the end, I realized it didn't matter. I couldn't change the past. All I could do was learn from it, grow from it, and try to be a better person moving forward. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the park, I stood up from my bench. I took one last look at Henry and the kids, committing the image of their happiness to memory. Then I turned and walked away towards an uncertain future, but one that I was finally ready to face. I had a good life once, and I was happy with everything, but one time I wanted more freedom and pleasure. That desire drove me into a stinking swamp of my own making. But even in the darkest, most putrid depths of that swamp, I found something valuable. The truth about myself, about love, about what really matters in life. It's a truth I paid dearly for, a lesson learned through tears and heartache, but it's a truth I'll carry with me for the rest of my days. And maybe, just maybe, by sharing my story, I can help others avoid the same painful journey. So if you're out there feeling restless in your relationship, thinking the grass might be greener on the other side, take it from someone who's been there. The grass isn't greener. It's artificial turf, and it'll never satisfy you the way tending your own garden will. Appreciate what you have. Nurture it. Cherish it. Because you never know how precious something is until it's gone. And sometimes, by the time you realize it, it's too late to get it back. As for me, I'm still here, still standing, still learning and growing every day. My life isn't what I thought it would be, but it's mine. And I'm determined to make the most of it, to honor the lessons I've learned, and to never again take for granted the true blessings of love, family, and fidelity. It's not an easy road, this path of redemption and self-discovery, but it's a necessary one. As I walk it, day by day, I hold on to the hope that someday, somehow, I'll find peace. Not the false peace I once sought in Arnold's arms, but true peace, the kind that comes from self-acceptance, from making amends, from living with integrity. And who knows, maybe someday, years from now, I'll be sitting on another park bench. And maybe I'll look up and see my children, all grown up, with families of their own. Maybe they'll see me too, and instead of turning away, they'll smile and wave. Maybe they'll even come over and sit with me for a while. It's a beautiful dream, a goal to work towards. And even if it never comes true, the journey itself, the hard work of becoming a better person, of earning forgiveness, of learning to forgive myself, that journey is worthwhile in itself. So here I am, Sharon Thompson, reformed cheetah, cautionary tale, work in progress. My story isn't over yet. And while I can't change the chapters already written, I can control what comes next. It's time to write a new chapter, one of hope, growth, and redemption. Because in the end, that's all any of us can do. Learn from our mistakes, pick ourselves up, and keep moving forward. One day at a time, one step at a time, towards a future that's yet to be written.